There we go. Now we're being recorded.
Awesome.
I'm going to ask all.
Version otherwise.
Yes. So after this event is over, the recording will be captioned. Yes. I'm going to ask all of our panelists to introduce themselves, just so you have an idea of who they are. I am Erin. I am a white woman with dark hair, and I will be the moderator. I guess we will start with Micah, if you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Micah. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a non-binary Persian person with blue hair.
Kirsha?
Hi, my name is Kirsha. Ooh.
We have an echo.
My name is Kirsha. I'm a white woman with short hair that's colored blue as well.
Joe, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Joe or Jordan. I'm also a white woman with blonde hair, and I'm hard of hearing. That's my connection to protest access.
Ashley, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Ashley. I also go by Ash. I am a Black woman with salt and pepper hair.
And Holly, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Holly. I'm a white woman with brown hair, though most of my hair is tucked behind my ears right now. And my connection to Protest Access is that I'm a panelist today.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Let's see. I guess we can get started with questions. So first I have a question I'm going to ask you, Holly. Since you have done a lot of work with alt text and raising awareness on how to do it, if a graphic is given with links in it, how should that be dealt with in alt text, since a screen reader can't just go to a website directly from that?
So the best way of doing it is to, if you're posting it on social media, would be to put the link actually in the tweet. And you might say in the alt text, you might describe the graphic, but then refer to the fact that the link is available in a tweet or further down the thread. Because if it's in a regular tweet, you can click on it. You can put links in alt text, but it's not great practice because depending on the platform the screen reader user is using, they'll have to try and copy and paste it from that, and that's not always easy.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward. We have another question about alt text and visual descriptions for you, Holly. Mm-hmm. So some of our, this is from one of our volunteers, our Instagram posts, the actual post has a visual description in it, and we have embedded alt text. Is that poor practice, or is that disruptive for you as somebody who accesses both?
I don't think that's poor practice, because there are disabled people who aren't screen reader users but who benefit from image descriptions. So a screen reader user, if they've already read that description in the body of the post, they can just skip over it when they get to the photo, and that's really easy. We can just scroll past. I think it's actually better if you can do both, to do it like that.
Okay, perfect. That is great to know. Let's see. Let's ask another question from somebody who RSVP'd. I'm sorry, I do not have the name of who this question is tied to, but this is in general, so I guess take it whoever wants it. What recommendations do you have for people building apps and websites who want to responsibly and respectfully include the disabled community in the design process?
I can take this one, because to me it's a very simple answer. Include them on your team from the ground up. A lot of the failures of accessibility that happen tend to happen because companies, etc., treat accessibility like an afterthought, if they think about it at all. you don't want to build your entire app and then be like, oh, last minute, oh shit, we forgot. Oh no, you have a cousin who's blind, right? Like, let's bring that, what do you think? Like, that's not helpful. You should have people in your design process from the ground up for two reasons. One, they're going to tell you things that you never thought of because it's not your experience, but it is theirs. And two, it's way easier to do it from the beginning instead of trying to scramble at the last minute and fix things and change things. You know, it's way easier to start a project and make it accessible from the ground up than it is to try and change it at the last second. So it should just be part of your design team, part of your design process.
Does anyone have anything to add? No? All right, we will keep going then. The other I think it's related. Somebody else has asked, I'd love to hear evaluations of digital tools and apps and what seems to be the best for digital accessibility. I don't know if any
I
of
can
you...
take it. if
Okay,
people
perfect.
want. So there are accessibility evaluation tools. What I would recommend you start with is honestly going to the accessibility guidelines that are published. And maybe, I don't know if it's possible, we can include a link to those after this, because they will give you all the information about the current accessibility standards for the web. And they will also point you towards any kind of tools and things that meet those standards. So there's lots of tools out there that will say, oh, we'll test for web accessibility, but they don't all comply with current standards. So really it's just to follow the web accessibility standards. And I would go back to what was said about including disabled people on your design teams, because automated tools are great and they will pick up a lot, but you've really got to include disabled people as well. I mean, in terms of actual building platforms, if you're talking about web development, I mean, there are tools like WordPress that you can use, which do have accessibility features built in, but you still have to be really mindful and ensure that you're incorporating them yourself, because they're available, but you're not forced to use them. So you need to still make sure that your website is compliant.
Awesome. Now we have a question that goes back to the organization as a whole. How did this project originate? Whose idea was it? How did it come together and when? That might be a Micah question.
Well, so originally this goes back to CODA's Children of Deaf Adults and Siblings of Deaf Adults, who have kind of been doing this for a long time on Twitter before the protests and everything started. It seems like it's been kind of common practice for people to be like, hey, let me write up some transcripts for these videos that are going around about a big thing that's happening. But for us in particular, with the murder of George Floyd back in right around the beginning of June, yeah, the end of May, beginning of June, we obviously saw like a huge explosion of videos. And so a couple CODAs in particular made tweets about how they would be willing to provide transcripts for people if they contacted them. And then I believe Niall DeMarco retweeted one of those and it kind of blew up. And that's how I initially saw it. And I thought, hey, I want to get involved in this. And I wasn't the only one. So a few people reached out, messaged Grace, and we kind of got into a Twitter group chat. And then more and more people started to be like, hey, I want to be in this too. And we had like 20 people in a Twitter group chat and it was really hard to coordinate. So I was like, hey, why don't I make a Discord? So I made a Discord and we moved into Discord. And then from there, it just kept getting bigger. And then who was it? I don't remember exactly who suggested Trello. I think it was Dylan. Dylan suggested Trello. And so we started moving into Trello and our work like flow and everything just kept getting bigger until now we have all these documents and hundreds of people and like a massive, massive thing. It blew up way beyond anything I could have ever expected. I see we have a raised hand.
We do. So I'm going to ask Karen to unmute so that they can maybe ask a question.
I just wanted to know where you get videos and the information. Is it all come through things that people send you? Do you look for it yourselves?
The videos, we wait for people to tag us because we don't want to curate content. So people will tag us on Twitter or message us on Instagram or Facebook. And we take those videos that we've been tagged in and work on those requests.
I can talk a little bit about the workflow process if that would be helpful.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
So videos, we get tagged on a social media network. We have a team of people who take those requests in and create cards in Trello that relate for each piece of content. And then it moves through a series of steps in our workflow. So the first one is just a basic audio transcript. The second step is to add visual description, which is what we're heavily focusing on for the Accessathon. And then the third step is to add captions. And once we have all three of those together, that's a finished Protest Access product. And sometimes for certain types of content, we'll post at various steps in the workflow. But that's how things make their way through our workflow.
Is there a rough estimate as to how many volunteers are in the organization?
Yes, we have 230 something people who have signed up to volunteer. As far as active members, it's closer to 100.
Okay. Is there an idea of how long it typically takes to process the requests from beginning to end?
So I can take this one too. This one really depending on the type of content. So we get some stuff that we're requested multiple times on, stuff that's either super timely or has gone viral and everybody wants access to it. So if you get requested on something a lot of times, it moves through our workflow quicker. And that can be anywhere between 1 to 3 or 4 days is typical for priority content. And then for regular content, with the backlog we have in VS, we still have some content that's from back in late June. So that's still stuck in our workflow. So it can really vary.
So how do you decide who does which videos?
Sure.
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I mean, that's up to the volunteers. So everybody who volunteers with us gets access to our Trello board, which is the workflow management system. And they're able to go in and each card has a picture so you can get an idea of what the content is maybe about. You can see the length of the content, and then we also put in tags for content warnings. And volunteers are onboarded usually for 1 role, maybe 2. They go into the column for that part of the workflow and choose what they'd like to work on. We recommend and we ask that people, if they can, choose the oldest content, and the lists are all sorted so that the oldest content is the most visible. But really it's up to the volunteer.
Kirsha, why did you start volunteering for Protest Access, and have you done this sort of work before?
So I am not an organizer. I work as a captioner with Protest Access when I am able to find the time in my schedule. I joined Protest Access. I was actually introduced to it from another interpreter student. I did take some time and study ASL interpreting, and I'm conversationally fluent. But I really wanted to be a part of the protests, and because of COVID-19 and familial health, I didn't feel comfortable going out to the protests. And I really wanted to be able to show my support somehow. And because I do have access to the computer and I do have the time, I decided that this was something that I could do in order to increase awareness. And it's really something that I was able to do because I do have the experience with paying attention to a video and what's being said, and learning to caption itself actually wasn't that difficult. The whole workflow guidelines, we have guidelines about how everything should be done. We have reminders of important things. So even if you have no experience, it's really very easy to get into it, which I thought was really great. I feel like I answered more than what you asked now.
That's perfect. Let's see. What sort of content seems to be the most difficult to work with?
There are a couple of categories. One is like when there's a lot going on with the audio. If it's a protest where there's a bunch of people and lots of people are talking, it's hard to tell which voices to focus on. It's hard to tell what's important. Those can take a lot of time to process. The other one that sort of comes to mind for me would be graphic or triggering content. Something that's hard to watch can be really hard to process, to visually describe or to transcribe, or to spend time looking at each and every scene and putting captions associated with it. So those are the two that really stand out to me. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would fully agree. Crosstalk is a nightmare. And especially with captioning where you are looking at the video and trying to adjust the timing of each line and cutting up the text and having to rewatch things over and over and over again with the really triggering content that we can get, it can be a lot. You know, and we try to remind our volunteers who have taken on particularly graphic videos. For one, we warn people up front, like, hey, this one kind of sucks. And then we try to make sure that people aren't burning themselves out and taking on like graphic video after graphic video.
What do you guys find as the most rewarding part of this work?
I think that the most rewarding part is just knowing that I am helping people who would not have access to this content have access to this content. That in itself is a reward, and knowing that I've helped in some way is just a fabulous feeling.
For me, I'm very new to the accessibility community. I found out I needed hearing aids when I was 25. I'm almost 30 now. And the thing that's been really awesome for me is posting the descriptive transcripts back to people who've requested them, and then getting to interact with them on social media. And I formed relationships with a couple of people and really gotten to know other people who have similar experiences to mine. That's been a really rewarding thing for me.
One of the things that I've enjoyed the most about this is seeing people who have never thought about accessibility, especially accessibility online with regard to videos and things, like seeing our work and being like, oh, hey, I didn't realize this was a thing, but now I know and I want to get involved and I want to help. Like, we've seen people say like, thank you so much for captioning this. I never even thought about it. How can I caption my future content? And, you know, we've seen people, one thing that kind of comes to mind especially was people who were just really grateful that we are captioning their stuff because it means that they're being heard. So just to see that not only are we like making an impact in terms of making things accessible to people, but that we're also kind of able to spread a greater message than that, which is like, hey, this is a thing, and that people are taking that on and really enthusiastic about it.
Anybody else have anything to add about what they find rewarding? No? Okay. Have any of you noticed any personal changes since you've started working with Protest Access or online accessibility?
For me, I've definitely noticed that I am a lot more aware of when things are visually inaccessible. Most of my focus, because of my personal experience, has been on audio inaccessibility, but especially since we started integrating visual descriptions and stuff, I've become a lot more aware. My brain pings me when it's like, hey, is this accessible visually or not? Which it wasn't so much doing before. It was a lot more like, it was harder for me to remember, but now it's like, hey, is this accessible for everybody or what's up? So that's been a positive thing for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have started adding alt text to like my pictures that I post on Twitter, that kind of stuff.
Kirsha, it looked like you agreed.
Oh yeah, definitely I agree. I think that I'm much more aware of content on the internet not being accessible. And I'm always kind of like, I feel like you could have done better than that from content creators. Because transcribing and captioning yourself is so much easier than somebody else coming in and not knowing anything about what the topic was. And it goes a lot quicker if you do it yourself as well than outsourcing it. And it just reminds me that using these auto captions, those aren't very accurate. I use them a lot of the time because I have an auditory processing issue with my ADHD, and it makes it a lot easier for me to pay attention to what's happening for me. And I'll be like, that is not what I heard. And people who can't hear at all, that's not going to help them. They're just going to get misinformation from those auto captions. So that just is something that's been, I think, just more driven home for me.
Yeah.
Also
And-
found myself getting more comfortable requesting accessible content from creators that I like. I have a hard time with accents. I have a really hard time with podcasts. Being able to understand, especially when they're technical in nature, which, if you know me, I like technical things. And like read people's names or being able to look up the title of a book, the things get muddled. And so I can follow the general conversation, but these really specific, some specific words get missed, and then you miss really like important things. And so I felt more comfortable reaching out to content creators and saying, hey, would you make a transcript for this? So that's been a change for me.
A lot, excuse me, a lot of ways to make your content accessible seems to be cost prohibitive for some people. How do you recommend that people work around that so that their content can still be accessible?
So actually I ran into this issue with the opening speech for the Successathon. My video was a little too big for Kapwing's free captioning or subtitle editing service, so I had to pay $20, which for the pro version, and that's $20 per month, not per year, which is wild to me. I understand, like, obviously operating costs, but it's completely inaccessible for most people to just pay $20 every month to caption their things. And like, you kind of have to do what you can. If nothing else, at the very least, word processing, you can use a paste bin. If you don't have a word processor on your computer, just write out a transcript. Something is better than nothing. Like half-assing is better than no-assing. Like, if you can do something, it'll help a lot of people. So there's this, and I know I fall victim to this too, like there's this kind of feeling you get where like, well, I don't know, I can't do this perfectly, so I give up. And it's like, just do what you can, because more often than not, that effort is going to completely change someone's experience and make it 1,000 times better. So why not just do what you can? And people, I think, are pretty understanding when they see that you put in effort. It's one thing to look at someone and see that maybe they couldn't provide captions, but they did provide a transcript, and maybe they couldn't do everything, but they did something. Like, they made that effort. At least in my experience, when I know I've needed accommodations or something, I've asked people to do something for me. If it wasn't perfect, but I can see that they made that effort, that means 1,000 times more to me than anything else. And I think that's something important to keep in mind, to not just be like, well, I don't know, I give up. Just do what you can. And most of the time, people are going to be really understanding about that.
I think the other thing too is building it into your process from the beginning, like we were talking about with web design. When you're creating the content, think about how it's going to be made accessible. I think a lot of video creators have transcripts that they read from, or they at least have outlines that they're working from. Turning an outline into a transcript is way easier than starting from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, building your process for creating content around providing accessibility.
Somewhat related, and something that Holly sort of touched on before, is what makes content accessible different depending on how they access it. Like, I know there are Braille readers, screen magnifiers. Does that change?
Certainly with alt text, because alt text isn't seen on the screen. So if you add alt text either in HTML or on something like Twitter, that is accessed by screen readers and by Braille displays, because Braille displays are driven by screen readers inherently. So you can access alt text on both of those. If you use magnification, you won't actually get the alt text unless you also use a screen reader, which lots of people do. Maybe they have a shortcut to it on their phone so that they can just switch it on and off as needed. And I mean, accessibility is a huge term. So accessibility for screen reader users and for blind people is very different from accessibility for deaf people. So one thing I do always advise people to do is be kind of flexible. So if you're going to provide captions that are embedded into the video, you've already written those captions out to embed them in the video. So put them as a text transcript as well, because if they're embedded in the video, they're just something that sighted people see, but a deaf-blind person won't be able to access them unless they're written out as a text transcript. So I tend to just advise people, you know, utilize what you've done. If you've written an image description out, it doesn't matter if you post it in the alt text and in the body of the post. Like, that's a second's more work, you know, but it makes a difference for other people.
I think that kind of touches on something that I think sometimes people are afraid of redundancy in their accessibility. They'll think, well, I have these captions, it would be silly to post them as a transcript, or I have this image description, it would be silly to do XYZ. And it's not, because people, you know, you take two deaf people, you take two blind people, you take two people with ADHD, all have different accessibility needs. And honestly, depending on the day, my own accessibility needs are completely different. You know, sometimes it's much more accessible for me to watch a video with captions, and sometimes I do not have any attention span for that, and it's way more accessible for me to read a transcript. So the redundancy is a good thing. I think sometimes we think of redundancy as like, you know, it has a negative connotation, but it's never a bad idea, I think, to have those different layers and to have that redundancy, because it just kind of shores everything up.
Yeah, I think that's something that another volunteer actually brought up earlier today, and that ensuring just because one thing is accessible for somebody may make it less accessible for another person. So the redundancy kind of covers that for everybody and makes sure that it's accessible to as many people as possible.
All right. I guess this kind of goes to the mission of Protest Access, but why is it so important to make protest and social justice related materials accessible to the blind, visually impaired, deaf, and hard of hearing communities?
Well, we're all citizens of this earth, and we all deserve to know what's going on. It's, you know, we are currently in the middle of, I think, the largest human rights movement in history. There's a lot of really, really important stuff that's going on, and we all live here. We all need to be able to know, like, what is happening. We all need to be able to make decisions about what we want to do. You know, leaving people out of the conversation is always terrible, you know, whatever scale it is. If it's just, you know, you're sitting with friends, or if it's talking about something global that's going on, it always sucks. It's never a good thing. And we all need to be able to access this information because it affects all of us.
I think the transition from like standard mass media companies to the social media individual contributor kind of style of news that we're seeing more and more of is one thing that makes Protest Access mission really important. A lot of media companies provide minimum accessibility features. Even some of them actually also don't. But for, you know, an individual content creator or somebody who's live streaming a protest or who's posting a video, you know, a discussion of how they feel about something, it is less likely for it to occur to them to provide accessibility. And so I think that makes it all the more important for groups like ours to exist, to be able to take those videos that go viral, the one-offs from, you know, a random person, to be able to make them accessible, because it's such a big part of our cultural conversations right now.
Here is an audience member's question. Can you tell us what it is like to work with Protest Access from the social justice oriented content, not just making it accessible, but for being social justice work? I guess it's kind of related to what Micah was saying too.
So, I mean, like not, you mean like how not all of our content is Black Lives Matter? We cover other types of content as well?
Well, the work you do is obviously accessibility related, but it's also in the social justice realm of work. What is that part of working?
I think
content like?
accessibility and social justice are not really you can't really separate them. Accessibility is part of social justice. You can't have social justice without it being accessible. So they are inherently related. I'm not 100% sorry. I'm a little bit confused about what exactly I want to be answering. Sometimes I don't do so well with vague questions.
I know.
But if someone else wants to jump in.
I'm thought formulating.
Yeah.
We
Can I
can,
hear the question one more time?
Yeah.
it was, what is working with this content from a social justice perspective? What does that work like?
Okay, I have something formulating. So we try to be as aware of our positionality as we can, because it's like we have to make sure that we're not hypocritical, and like, you know, we want to make things accessible and we want to boost, you know, the voices that should be heard, etc. And we want to be really careful not to take over by accident, not to speak over people, not to essentially continue to perpetuate any kind of oppression that we claim to stand against. I think that can be some of the trickiest work, but also some of the most rewarding work that we do.
A couple of things that come to mind for me. One is matching people's language in the way that they're speaking. So writing out a transcript with Aave or Ebonics. When we describe people, we try to use gender neutral terms unless we can find somewhere where they're identifying themselves. So trying to respect sort of the intersectionality of our humanhood in relation to how we're making the content accessible is part of that, I think.
Yeah, that reminds me. We have some significant differences, I think, in our standards for transcribing and captioning that aren't necessarily present in, what do I want to call it, like industry standard. We have some differences, and those differences are very deliberate, and we have sat down and thought about them and decided to change them. You know, like for example, a transcription standard, industry standard, is to edit things so that they all match standard English, which itself is a racist concept. You know, the idea that, for example, dialects like AAVE are not proper or standard English. And so industry standard is to change what people are saying into standard English. We actively make the decision not to do that. We caption and transcribe AAVE as it's said because it's a valid dialect and it should be represented. We also try to make it clear. We've experimented a little bit with like adding words in all caps or italicizing words when there's emphasis from the speaker, which is again not an industry standard. The industry standard is to just use regular sentence punctuation, not to emphasize any words. But we've kind of experimented with that and seeing like, is that helpful or is it distracting? Because inflection can be a huge part of a message, and it's important information that should be included. So we kind of are in a unique position where we can kind of play with these things and see if we can create a better standard that honestly, hopefully, I know big dreams, but I would love to see some of our standards kind of infiltrate the industry standard, because I think a lot of our changes have been for the better.
Can you mention what some of those are?
Yeah, like for example, not changing to standard English,
Okay.
or the inflection, etc. If anyone else has like anything that comes to mind, Kirsha especially.
I think one of the other things is the inclusivity and making sure that we're not labeling people based on society norms. So we don't say woman speaking unless they have identified themselves as a woman, as Jordan said. Same with man. If we don't have those identifiers provided for us by those people, we go ahead and we say, we describe what they're wearing. We say person in white shirt instead of putting those labels on them. So we don't really assume anything about what we are captioning. We try and go at it from the most unbiased perspective as possible in order to provide content that does not have our filter on it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
What comes to mind is censorship too. I know like there's been a lot of hubbub about, I think it's YouTube's auto captions are now censoring out swear words. And what that is essentially denying access to people who are hard of hearing or deaf. And so it's our policy to be loyal to the content. We type out what is in the content, whether that's racist terms or swear words or whatever it is. We're loyal to the content and making it accessible to the communities we're working for in the same way that it's accessible to hearing and seeing person. And so taking and keeping as much intact as we can, which I think goes back to the whole conversation about Abe as well.
So Ashley, it looks like you had something.
Yes. And I was just going to add, so gender neutral being a big one, but with standards advisors, we also recently reapproached the idea of just describing someone as just Black or just white, like the versus the industry standard. We go by saying a person with light skin or a person with dark skin, and even expanding beyond that, a person with medium brown skin or light brown skin, so that our audience knows exactly or can picture the person who's speaking.
Has that context.
Yes.
Do you have standards set so people who aren't experienced describing somebody in that way know how to do it?
Yes. Yes. And they're constantly evolving too. So as we're learning, we're evolving and changing our standards.
How do you set the standards? Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I was going to ask Ashley if you wanted to go more into kind of the standards advisor role, and because I think that is related to the broader question. If you want to
definitely.
kind of.
So I came into being a standards advisor literally in the last month or so. Just giving my feedback as part of a marginalized community helps to develop what our standards guide is going to be. I'm obviously not the only person who's a standards advisor. We build from our current volunteer community. So people from the deaf, hard of hearing, people who are LGBTQ, people who are from just different communities. We want to make sure that we have those inputs before we put out that content. Because again, inclusivity and accessibility is part of our mission. We decide those things usually through our, through discussion. We poll different volunteers as well. And then we make a decision. It's definitely not any one person speaking over anyone else.
How many standards advisors are there currently?
There's 7.
Yeah, I was going to say just a handful.
Yeah.
We are always looking for more because never too many thoughts or voices about things like this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If
One thing,
someone
very helpful.
one thing I'd like to say on the standards advisor committee is when I came in, it was, Protest Access had already moved to Trello, so they were relatively established compared to my descriptions of very early days. And at that point, they were actively searching for standards advisors. And I thought that that was a really wonderful thing because as a bunch of people who have relationships with, their children of deaf adults or siblings of deaf adults or, having relationships to people in the community and caring about accessibility is a different position in the world than relying on it for access to content. And so that's something that when I found out the team was actively recruiting and seeking out people for the standards committee, that just made me really happy and proud to be a part of this team.
Yeah, it's something that we have almost always from the beginning had in mind, is to have people who are part of the communities that we serve to be directing what we do. Because I think that, again, that's really valuable input that you can't, as much as you might try and understand as much of someone else's experience as possible, you are never really going to get it. So it's important to have people who are living that direct us.
If there's somebody who's interested in helping with the standards advisory, how would they go about doing that?
Honestly, just ping us in our channel, just at Standards Advisors.
Or send an email to
Absolutely.
access@gmail.com. Visa, who's transcribing for us, is our volunteer coordinator, manager extraordinaire, and can help find where you fit and what your role is. But like Micah said, we're definitely looking for more voices to add to that team.
So some of you have mentioned how you got involved with Protest Access. I don't think, Ashley, you have mentioned it.
Oh, okay.
If you want to.
Yeah. Obviously, the summer has been really hard seeing the Protest Access. Like Kirsha, I wanted to go out and be physically in the streets. It was a lot of back and forth in my family about not being able to do that and, physically making sure that you're safe. And I struggled and I struggled and struggled with how can I contribute? How can I still feel like I'm doing something to move the conversation forward? And I saw a Protest Access video on Twitter. And it just, from there, I was following the page and I was like, what else can I do? I was doing visual support and just checking out different videos. And the next thing I knew, I saw an email about advisory standards and joined that, and just wherever I think there's needed help. So.
Let's see. What do you guys see as the future for Protest Access in the long term?
I personally would love to have us be an advocacy group. I like to say that the ultimate goal of Protest Access is a world where we're not needed. I think we may be one of the only organizations out there that is actively working towards its own demise. And I'm really proud of that, honestly. Like, I obviously, I love the work that we do. I'm proud of the work that we do. I'm proud of everyone who's a part of this, but we shouldn't have to exist in the first place. The number of videos that we've captioned or made accessible from major news organizations that have the resources absolutely to do the accessibility work and things like that, it's appalling, frankly. It's a little bit different when you get down to the individual level. Like has said before, it can be cost prohibitive, it can be just inaccessible for people to access the tools that they need to make things accessible, whether that's monetary resources, energy, time. But I really would love to reach a point where we can kind of be like, okay, well, we don't really have anything left to do. That I think should really be the ultimate goal. And that's something that I don't know if we will see, but I really, really hope we do.
One of the things I think in the less long term, the sort of medium term, is to have a more stable project management and workflow process, establishing ourselves as a 50c3 so that we can get some benefits that come along with that financially, as well as like partnership wise. We would really like to be able to move content through our workflow faster. Having more volunteers, more people who are giving time would help, do that. So there's plenty of things in the short term even that can make, that we are working towards, that would make Protest Access better. Well, it still will have to exist.
On that point, how much time do you ask your volunteers to commit?
We don't. We don't have a minimum number of hours or a minimum number of check-ins that we require. We just ask that people work when they're able and contribute what they can. We are trying to figure out a process. We've definitely got some users who sign up for our volunteer form and then we never see them or hear from them again. And in that case, we're kind of working on a process to figure out how to re-engage people and bring them on board, but there's no minimum requirement for what you have to do.
Yeah, it's a rough time for everybody. So if all you can do is like 30 minutes every 2 weeks, that's fine. That's 30 more minutes of work than we would have had otherwise. Or if you are gung-ho and you do like 5 hours of content in the first week and then you realize you're really burnt out and you don't do anything for the next 3 weeks, like, it's cool. Just do what you can, because nobody's getting paid. None of us are getting paid. Like, everyone is absolutely just donating their time and their energy for no, physical or monetary compensation. Just do what you can. There's absolutely no requirement or expectation beyond what you can. And we want to make sure that people don't burn themselves out, because you cannot draw from an empty well. You're not, you can't help anybody if you have drained yourself. So
There's a little over 10 minutes left. Is there anything that any one of you feels needs touching on or is important to say today?
I just want to encourage anyone who maybe has been thinking about volunteering, but they're not sure. They think, oh, I don't know if I can do a good enough job. I don't know anything about XYZ. Almost all of us are amateurs and had no idea how to do any of this stuff before we joined. That's why we have such detailed workflow instructions. We have literally everything listed out for you in our Discord. You're free to ask questions, and any questions are welcome. We're also extremely I like to think that we are an extremely accepting community. A lot of our organizing members are neurodiverse. I myself have ADHD, and I'm 99% sure I'm autistic. So we try and work with everyone, meet everyone where they're at. I've had volunteers before be like, hey, I'm through the onboarding process, but I was kind of nervous. I didn't want to say this because I have auditory processing issues and I wasn't sure if that would bar me, or I'm autistic and I wasn't sure if that would bar me from joining. No, you are welcome. Everybody is welcome. If the only thing holding you back is worry that you won't be able to do a good enough job, you will. Please come join us. We love having people. We love having more people. So if you've been thinking about it, come on. We
also just launched a mentorship program too. So for each of the 3 individual roles that we have, transcribing, visual support, and captioning, we've got a pool of mentors who can be assigned to you, and you can work through your first piece of content with them, ask as many questions as you want in a private environment. I know it can sometimes be overwhelming when you join a new group to ask questions in sort of a really public way. And so that exists as well.
Yeah, I guess just to add to, you're not working in a silo. Like, PA is really a community. We have different sections where you can quote unquote shit post or quote unquote just vent. We post pictures of our families, our cats and rabbits, and we're all working towards a common purpose and a goal. So you don't have to feel like you're alone.
And also, if you have feedback or anything like that, I want to emphasize, we try and keep our hierarchy as flat as possible. So anyone, if you've just joined and you're like, hey, I have some thoughts about whatever, please share them, because we try not to oh, you've only been here for 2 minutes, you don't get to say anything. No, we want thoughts. We want everyone's opinions, because that's how we grow. So
that was a very weird thing for me when I first came on board, because everybody was like, oh, you're interested in this? Well, here, let's just give you this whole project. And look, now you're the workflow manager. But if you've got an interest and you're enthusiastic and you want to come on board and be a part of this, there's a spot for you. We have space, and we'd love to have you. As a person who's hard of hearing, I was pretty nervous doing my first transcripts. I was also pretty anxious about the fact that the recommendation is to start from the top of the list. I don't hear super well, and a lot of the top content is priority content that has a lot of crosstalk. And I have found that it's very much accepted for me to go in and pick videos that I'm comfortable doing. And if I have spots that I'm stuck on, I'll email or just chat at somebody and say, hey, can I get a pair of good ears on this? And that's totally fine because transcribing is something that I enjoy doing. I'm just not super great at it. So like if that's a concern for you as well, we have resources to help.
Yeah, we try and be as flexible as we can, and like you can go in and start a video and maybe get through a minute of it and then realize, oh my God, I don't know what to do with this part, and also I just realized I haven't eaten and I can't handle this anymore. I'm just gonna put this to the side. Like, you're allowed to pop in, do a minute. If that's all you can do, great. That's a minute of content that wasn't done before, and then you can just put it back into needs to be transcribed and someone else will pick up where you left off. Like, we try to be as flexible as possible.
I guess, Holly, do you have any last comments you want to share with us?
I think I just really want to echo what's been said about just trying and not being scared when you're new to this. So a lot of people, when they find out about accessibility, think, oh, there is so much. And maybe they find out by reading accessibility guidelines. And I definitely encourage people who are really interested deeply in accessibility to go and read those guidelines. But if you have never heard of accessibility, that's a really daunting place to start. So I would say just start by doing what you can. Like, maybe you start with an overview of your content. You know, you don't know how to write a transcript yet, and you write an overview. And then maybe you move into more captions. It's okay to start like that and ease yourself into it, because the community does notice that you're trying. And also, it's okay to ask questions. Like, it's okay to find those of us online who are answering those questions and say, oh, hey, can I ask you, what's the best way of doing this? Like, and we're out here and we want to help you. So I think just try and don't get too hung up on having to be perfect.
That's definitely reassuring. If I, as a plain old person on social media, am trying to make my content accessible and somebody reaches out that I am doing it incorrectly, what is my best approach on how to handle that?
Ooh, am I okay to answer this?
Yes.
Yeah. Go for it.
So I think the best way is to listen to what they're saying. And, a lot of the time someone will say, oh, you're not doing this right. And our first response is to go, well, I'm just trying my best, okay? And you feel really defensive and you're upset because you're trying and someone's calling you out, as it were. But the thing is, people aren't calling you out. They're just saying, I'm really struggling to access this. They're not saying you're a terrible human being. They're just saying, hey, this isn't working so well for me. So I think just trying to engage in conversation with them and ask, okay, what might I do to make this easier? Or come up with ideas with them and be open to, if for example, you find writing image descriptions really hard, say, is there a tool that can help me with that? Because invariably there are different tools and you don't know unless you ask. So I think it's totally okay to ask those questions and just recognize that people aren't saying it to hurt your feelings. They're just saying it because it genuinely is hard for them to access.
And honestly,
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a compliment, I think. Like, people saying your content is accessible to them is literally them saying, I want you to make your content
Yeah.
so I can access it, which I think you have to sort of take that as part of it too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this has been one of the hardest things for me to internalize, but also something that I'm really glad that I have, is that when people do kind of call you out and say like, hey, what are you doing here? This is not accessible to me, or this is, a racist thing that you've said, or this is a sexist thing, like any of that kind of thing, like Holly said, our initial reaction be like, well, I'm trying my best, or I'm not, a terrible person. Like, why are you attacking me? It's not an attack. And it's almost never about you specifically. It's about society as a whole. It's about the oppression that people have faced generally over their entire lifetimes. And this is a symptom of that. And so, yeah, sometimes people can be a little aggressive, big air quotes, or angry or emotional about something like this. And that might come across to you in that message. And like, the hardest thing for me to remember, but again, one of the most rewarding things for me to remember is that like, it's not about me. It's not about me as a person. It almost never is. It's about the centuries of oppression. It's about the way that society is set up. And, you know, I try to be grateful when people, like Joe said, like when people say, hey, can you fix this because I can't access it? Like they want to. They want to
engage
access
with your
something.
stuff.
Exactly. Like it's just not about you. It's about the world in general and what we can do to make it a better place, frankly. And I think that's one of the most important things to remember.
I also think by and large, I think by and large, the sentiment in a lot of communities is that if you're going at it with a good attitude and you're willing to accept that feedback, it's not always going to be feedback that's for you necessarily, but being accepting of any feedback and understanding that your good attitude is making all the difference. That's all that a lot of communities are asking for, is that you are open to doing something to help.
And also to remember, like, you are going to make mistakes. There's no way that you won't. Like, you cannot be perfect. You're going to make those mistakes. So remembering that can help kind of, at least it helps me, it helps take away some of that shame, because I am absolutely a perfectionist and I never want to hurt anybody. And I just, the instant I realize I have, I'm like, oh my God, oh no, what have I done? And it's like, it's okay. You're going to make mistakes. What's important is how you react to those mistakes. And the best way to move forward from a mistake is to hear and accept that feedback and internalize it and take it and use it to be better in the future.
One other thing in terms of like, it's not about you, is to remember that people who have accessibility needs butt up against inaccessible content all the time. And that can get exhausting. And sometimes you might just be the fall person. You might be the straw that, your content might be the straw that broke the camel's back. And so remembering, like, I listen to every podcast I listen to, I feel frustrated. And so if the email that I send to the content creator is a little bit frustrated, it's not specifically on that podcast creator. It's just that podcasts as a medium are largely, at least partially, inaccessible to me.
Any closing statements by anybody, or does anybody in the Zoom room have a final question before we call it a night or afternoon, depending on where in the world you live? I'm not seeing any questions in the audience. So
Thank you, Erin.
I really want to thank each and every one of you for the time that you do for this work and for being here today. I really appreciate it, and I know that a lot of other people really appreciate all the work that you do. So thank you, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day or night.
Thanks, Erin.
All right.
Thank you, Holly, for being here.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Erin, for cat
Moderating.
wrangling. And thank you, everyone, for being here. It means a lot to see people. So.
All right. Well, that's it. Thank you, everybody, and we will be around. If you have questions on social media, feel free to tag us or DM us or just respond to any of our posts, and we will try to answer those. Thanks, and bye.